Before you tonight, we have a zoning code amendment regarding temporary uses within the city. And just to give you a little bit of background, throughout the year we have various temporary sales display stands. Most jurisdictions call them temporary uses. Christmas tree stands, fireworks stands, sunglass stands, produce stands, art stands are all really examples of these types of temporary sales display stands throughout the city. Currently we have an issue in that temporary uses are not defined within the zoning code, so based upon the exclusionary nature of the zoning code, if a use is not specifically listed, that means that it's prohibited, so we have a conflict there. Typically what we've said before is that when you have these temporary uses that pop up, that as long as they're in a zoning district which would allow that type of retail use, then they would generally be allowed to exist. We had two issues within the past year with temporary uses. First, we had a fireworks stand which was located mainly in a residential zoning district, which was an issue because that type of commercial retail use would not be allowed in a residential zone. It was on an undeveloped lot, and it was located in close proximity to a busy intersection that caused a safety traffic issue. We also had parking access, which was problematic to the site because of the location and proximity to that intersection. Also had a produce stand located near the south couplet, and it was on an undeveloped lot, and that was also located in close proximity to a busy intersection. The access points were really undefined. There was a couple of highway approaches there. People were entering on the northerly approach and going all the way across the property, which had created a tendency for dust or mud generated from those cars' activity on the property. Also had poor circulation within the site. Parking wasn't clearly delineated, and they were going across the property in order to get to the stand. So we had reported this to Administrative Committee on December 8th of last year, and Admin Committee had directed staff to take a look at possibly including temporary uses within the code and work with Planning and Zoning Commission on that. And we had looked at some other jurisdictions and how they permit temporary uses. We had looked at Boise, Post Falls, Spokane Valley, Washington, Eugene, Oregon, LeGrand, Oregon. And most require temporary use permits to review things like vision triangles. These are primarily at intersections, just to be able to view oncoming traffic and have make sure there's no safety hazard there. Wanted to review setbacks just to make sure any temporary structure associated with a temporary use was going to meet the setbacks of the underlying zoning district. Wanted to make sure circulation was adequate on site, as well as access point, those existing approaches to the property where they were going to locate, make sure those were clearly defined, and also keep track of the duration. Most of the jurisdictions that we had looked at required a 30-day limitation on temporary uses. They also wanted to check that the temporary use was going to be located in the appropriate zoning district and not, for instance, a residential zoning district. So after we reviewed those jurisdictions, drafted a proposed ordinance, which is before you tonight. We'd really be going in Chapter 3, which is our commercial zoning districts portion of the code. And within central business, general business, motor business, industrial, and urban mixed commercial zones, be inserting under permitted principal uses and structures, temporary uses, which would be subject to the specific use standards, and those are located in Chapter 12 of the zoning code. And then also within the motor business zone, under those permitted principal uses and structures, right now we have a section which discusses retail enterprises and then provides a large list of retail uses. Towards the end you have building, materials, stores, and yards. Just wanted to provide clarification that includes landscaping, materials, stores, and yards. You have a lot of these incidental uses that come out seasonally, like the landscape supply yard that's associated with Walmart, takes up a portion of the parking lot during the summer. And you also have an expansion of the outdoor landscape material area for Moscow Building Supply and other building supply stores. So just wanted to make sure this was not construed as some type of temporary use and would be encompassed under the temporary use ordinance. And then within the limitations on uses, also within the motor business zone, some zones, and motor business is one of them. Some of them require that all uses have to be conducted wholly and entirely within enclosed buildings. And there's a long list under motor business of those uses that are exempt from that requirement. So we'd be inserting landscape supply yards, as well as temporary uses as permitted by this code. Landscape supply yards, just to further that distinction between temporary uses and those landscape uses. Then within Chapter 3, our industrial zone, once again under permitted principal uses and structures. Another just clarifying item, but this is just to make this consistent with the wording in the motor business zone. We strive for consistency as to avoid confusion when you're looking across zoning districts, and so just revise that to say building and landscape materials, stores, and yards. Then within our definitions portion of the zoning code, we would have to insert temporary use, which we've defined as a land use established for a limited duration which does not require permanent site improvements. Temporary uses include but are not limited to the erection of temporary structures for activities such as fruit and vegetable sales, Christmas tree sales, fireworks sales, art sales, and other retail sales permitted within the zoning district which the proposed use is to be located. And that would bring us to Chapter 12, specific use standards section. So we'd be inserting standards for temporary uses, insert a portion of applicability and purpose intended to allow temporary uses upon developed or undeveloped commercial property within the city, subject to the following standards. And these standards are intended to reduce the potential traffic, parking, safety, and nuisance issues, which could potentially be associated with the short-term nature of temporary uses within the city. Then we go into the specific standards of temporary uses. I want to take a look at site access, just to make sure vehicular ingress, egress to the property is from an established vehicular approach. So when you're talking about developed property, in almost all circumstances, you're going to have existing approaches through curb cuts and curbing around the perimeter of the property. Now, in those circumstances where the temporary uses are located on maybe an undeveloped lot, which is gravel or dirt, and doesn't have those existing approaches, we'd want to have those clearly identified and delineated, and not present a traffic hazard to the adjacent roadway. And we want to make sure that our city engineer was comfortable with establishing temporary approaches to those properties. Then we discuss site circulation, just to make sure the parking on site and the travel lanes, albeit temporary, shall be delineated and maintained, and that's in order to reduce risk of vehicular conflicts as well as to ensure orderly circulation on the site. Want to make sure setbacks are accounted for within the underlying zone. The setbacks vary depending upon which zone you're in. Just want to make sure any of the proposed temporary structures that are placed on those sites meet the setbacks. And vision triangles, this is already inherent in our code that you're required to meet vision triangles, but really it's on street intersections. It's those areas where you go from the curb line extended 40 feet back in either direction, connect those lines to draw a triangle. Within those areas, objects are restricted, so you can't place anything above 3 feet in height, which is opaque, and it's just to not present some type of safety hazard for oncoming traffic when you pull up to one of those street intersections. And so that has to be in accordance with our city standard construction specifications and drawings, and those were adopted last year by council. Wanted to clarify the duration. They're restricted to 45 days per calendar year. We'd previously had 30, but Planning and Zoning Commission's recommendation was to up that to 45, so we didn't capture maybe those uses that went 30, 35 days within a calendar year. Wanted to make sure there's no nuisances that were generated associated with temporary uses, so they wouldn't result in dust, noise, tracking of dirt in the right-of-way, or any other nuisances that could be potentially generated with temporary uses. And then lastly, a permit would be required in certain circumstances, and that would be when a temporary use is conducted on undeveloped property or property which does not have an existing developed parking area. So all these standards would apply to all temporary uses depending upon whether or not they're located in a paved parking area or not. It's just that the folks that wanted to locate on undeveloped property like the south couplet, where maybe some approach is established, but no parking area for the temporary uses to locate, they'd have to come to our office and get a temporary use permit just to make sure we have all the standards taken care of there. Planning and Zoning Commission did conduct a public hearing on the ordinance, and that happened on April 8th, and they recommended approval to City Council. Staff's recommendation before you tonight is to conduct a public hearing and after considering any testimony, approve the ordinance under suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and that it be read by title and published by summary. I'd certainly be able to answer any questions that you might have about that.
Mike, I have a question. Originally, staff recommended 30 days, but Planning and Zoning changed it to 45 days. And after reading through it, I was kind of guessing it was because of the Christmas tree stands. May very well run more than 30 days. Was that kind of the reason for that?
Yeah, no, Christmas tree stands, maybe pushing that, as well as the fish stand that shows up in the co-op parking lot every Friday. So maybe those continual, every Friday type uses. They take a few months off, and so they wouldn't reach the 45-day mark, but they would definitely be over the 30-day mark. So they just wanted to provide a little bit more of a buffer on the duration and to give those folks a break.
Okay. Questions for Mike? Walter.
Thank you, Mayor. Mike, in 12.7, start with your C that you've got up there right now, requiring the permit only for undeveloped property or property which does not have an existing developed parking area. I understand that, but several of the items preceding that, such as site circulation setbacks, vision triangle, are also applicable to paved parking lots that have pre-designed or pre-used access. You didn't feel it necessary to require everybody to get a permit? I'll give you a hint. Was it too onerous? Were there too many people that come every year and set up there? I mean, what was the thinking between doing just the undeveloped?
Well, in our observation, we haven't really ran into an issue with that before. If they're in a parking lot, they're usually taking up maybe some additional parking spaces in the travel lanes. So the folks that allow them to be there usually regulate on where they can be, and they want them to not prohibit customer parking and circulation on site. So we didn't really feel that was too big of an issue as opposed to the ones that are on undeveloped property, but really didn't want to make it too onerous for people that come every fireworks stands that do all these requirements already, and we don't have any issue with. We'd still be able to go out there and say somebody sets up in the vision triangle. We'd still be able to go out and work with them to relocate these temporary structures, but we didn't feel it was necessary to have them come in and get a permit, when they've been doing it for a number of years and they seem to be working, fine. It was just kind of the last year, the couple issues that we had with undeveloped property.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for Mike before I open the public hearing? Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
I will open the public hearing at 7:50, and I will take all claims for anybody that's interested that would approve this. Please step forward, state your name, and we'll listen to your comments. Seeing none rush this podium, I will take general comments or opposition to this ordinance proposal. I will close it at 7:51. Then put the discussion in front of the council. John.
Yeah, when this was first brought up to planning and zoning, I thought it was a solution in search of a problem, and I still feel that way. And although I'll support this. We do seem to love our policies and rules and stuff here in Moscow, and we seem to make a new rule or a new city ordinance when we don't have anything else to do. We've had 2 problems in the last year over that particular issue. One was, and they were both could have been handled without this. But the questions that were asked at Planning and Zoning were answered, and good questions were asked. They discussed it front to back, top to bottom, and this is what we came up with. So I'll support it, although I would really be disheartened if this ordinance was used to prevent people from coming in and putting up a small display area to sell things. I don't think that'll happen, but that would be my only real problem with it.
Dan?
Yeah, I agree with John to an extent that, it's a solution kind of looking for a problem, but I think that they found a problem when they found a problem with a stand set up, and realizing that our code, being exclusionary as it is, didn't allow a lot of things that were already happening to go on. So we had to, staff had to go through and make these changes so things could be allowed, and give it a little bit of by right stuff in some of the zones that it is, like an already a parking lot where they have permission from the property owner. We went over this in administrative committee the other day, and basically that's what it came down to is, and with that, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the ordinance under suspension of the rules, requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and that be read by title and published by summary.
I second that. Beat again.
Dan made a motion, and Jim Boland made a second to approve the ordinance of the amendment of Title IV, Chapter 3, 11, 12 of the Moscow City Code regarding temporary uses, and to approve this ordinance under the suspension of the rules, requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and that it be read by title and published by summary. Wayne.
I just want to make a comment, and John, I agree with you, and it seems like every time we turn around, we're finding a need where we have to write another ordinance or we have to create another rule. And unfortunately, there happens to be instances that jump up that we have to do that, and one example would be one of those particular booths last year where they found this problem, and there was a lack of coordination among various entities as far as what was required of that particular booth. And I think that by having this requirement of a permit, temporary permit for unimproved property, will help coordinate things like that a little bit better. It'll bring all the parties together so everybody knows what has to be done. So as much as I wish I didn't have to vote for this, I will.
Art.
I'd just like to say that I agree with Dan a bit more about it, that given the exclusionary nature of our codes, by not having this there, we tend to exclude more than we would allow, and this actually provides a broader, more predictable playing field for people to establish their temporary uses, and so I'm in favor of it mostly for that reason.
Okay, with that, I'll start the roll with you, John.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
And I.
Okay, and 6-0, so the ordinance passed, and it's ordinance number 2015-07. Okay, ordinance number 2015-07, an ordinance of the City of Moscow, Idaho, a municipal corporation of the State of Idaho, providing for the amendment of Moscow City Code, Title IV, Chapter 3, Chapter 11, Chapter 12, providing for the definition and establishment of standards for temporary uses, providing for the allowance of temporary uses within the central business district, the general business, the motor business, industrial, and urban mixed commercial zoning districts, providing that the provisions of this ordinance be deemed severable, and providing for this ordinance to be in full force and effect from the date of its passage, approval, and publication according to law.